Okay, hello everybody. I think we are now ready to start with our Michael Ventris Memorial Lecture. It gives me great pleasure as chairman of the Mycenaean Studies Advisory Committee, on behalf of my colleagues, to welcome you all here. The Michael Ventris Memorial Lecture is held every other year at the Institute of Classical Studies to mark the contribution made by Ventris to the study of Aegean prehistory. As many of you will know, Ventris was an architect and talented linguist who deciphered the Mycenaean linear B script, finding it to be an early form of Greek. In the now famous BBC radio broadcast in June 1952, Ventris announced the breakthrough, and I quote, "For a long time, I too thought that the Etruscan might have formed the clue we were looking for. But during the last few weeks, I've suddenly come to the conclusion that the Knossos and Pylos tablets must, after all, be written in Greek. A difficult and archaic Greek, saying that it's 500 years older than Homer, and written in a rather abbreviated form, but Greek nevertheless." End of quote. In the wake of the decipherment, the newly established Institute of Classical Studies decided to set up a seminar further to explore the reading of linear B tablets and their wider implications for our understanding of Bronze Age Greece. Ventris was present at the first meeting in 1954 and remained an active member of the seminar until his untimely death in 1956. Today, the Institute continues to maintain links to Ventris by administering a trust fund set up in his memory, which sponsors postdoctoral research projects. The Institute also provides a home for the Ventris archive, and last but not least, hosts the Memorial Lecture, where leading Aegean prehistorians are invited to present important new discoveries to a wider audience. It is therefore with great pleasure that we welcome this evening Professor Vance Watrous, a leading Aegean prehistorian. Professor Watrous studied at Princeton and the University of Pennsylvania, and he's currently Professor of Archaeology at the University of Buffalo, teaching in the departments of Art History, Classics, and Anthropology. A regular member of the American School of Classical Studies at Athens, he has excavated at Frankfurt Cave, Corinth, Haliis, Knossos, Chania, and Komos, and has run archaeological surveys in the Argolid, on Crete, in the Lassithi Plain, the Messara, around Gournia, and Galatas. His wide-ranging research interests and publications include Minoan archaeology, Aegean Near Eastern interconnections, the iconography of Greek art, and modern Greek studies. To date, he has published 7 scholarly books, the most recent of which appeared in 2017 and is entitled The Galatas Survey, a history of the Upper Pediada region of Crete during the Neolithic to Ottoman period. He is currently preparing a book for Cambridge University Press entitled Minoan Crete, an Introduction. Professor Watrous is the director of the American Excavations at Gournia on the island of Crete. This is a site first excavated in 1901-1904 by Harriet Boyd, and from 2010 to 2014 by the team of Professor Watrous. And if I'm not mistaken, this summer is actually the last study season for the project of Gournia, but Professor Watrous can always...
One hopes.
One hopes, one hopes. This year's Michael Ventris Memorial Lecture is on exactly this topic, the recent and exciting work of Professor Watrous and his team at Gournia, and we are indeed very honored to have him with us tonight to talk to us about recent excavations at Gournia, Crete, new archaeological finds, and consular perspectives. Professor Watrous.
Actually, it'd be nice if those two lights could go. Can you all hear me in the back, or do I need a microphone? We're all right. Okay. Bravo, bravo, bravo. Perfect. All right, all's well that ends well. I was sitting in the hotel thinking, oh my God, where are they? Anyway, we're here, so let's get started. I've been introduced, so I won't say anything about that. This is the site that I'm working on, have been working on for some time now. And I began preparing this lecture. I came up with this title. And obviously it's based on Charles Dickens, and I found out to my pleasure, I'm in the hotel is right across the street from Dickens's house, so it's a small coincidence. Anyway, the idea the idea that I had was that I would first present to you the finds of the primary excavator, who is a woman I'll introduce you to in a minute, Harriet Boyd, and then I would reevaluate the site based on what our work has been, okay? And so that we would get a picture of two cities. Well, it didn't turn out that way. As you're going to see, I'm going to show you, in fact, what we saw, what the conclusions that I came to is that we supported, confirmed everything that she said. The only real difference is, it's clear we have a deeper understanding, a much more detailed understanding of the town than was present at the beginning of the century. All right, so that's my introduction. Okay, for those of you, I'm not sure, those of you know that Gournia is here in the East Crete. All right, and this is the Bay of Mirabello, and we're right there, right on the coast, 400 meters from the coast. Okay, so the first excavator was Harriet Boyd. There she is, between 1901 and 1904. This is a remarkable woman. She's 29 years old. Came to Crete and started an excavation. And look what she did. She produced 60 houses. She produced a court, central court, a palace. I'll show you some other things too. And then, even more remarkable, 4 years later, she published it. In a beautiful book, which is still extremely useful. Here's the way she characterized the site. I very much like the second sentence because she's right on. Okay? So she cleared 60 houses, and when you go to the site, I don't know, just out of curiosity, show of hands, how many people have been to the site? Oh, wow. Well, you know, I mean, at least I can't be the only one here. You know, when you get there, you wait, you'll see it, you're waiting to think a Minoan will be coming out of the front door somewhere. The thing is so lifelike. And here's a really nice reconstruction done by Christoph Maliki that shows what the town would have looked like. Okay, and sure enough, there's a ton of evidence that she was right. The town was producing all kinds of metal objects. You can see them here. Pins, cauldrons, swords, saws, axes. Here are some of them that are in the museum. You can see the swords on the left, an axe. Very likely that's a fish hook. Here again, maybe a chisel. And she even found the molds for the metalworking, which is pretty amazing. I mean, the detail here is really quite unexpected. I won't say it's unmatched, but it's pretty close. All right. Also, pottery. This is from her publication. Here are some of the pots that were produced at the site. You see all kinds of shapes: cups, jugs, pithoi, and here two color ones. These both come from Gournia. Stone vessels, expensive stone vessels. You can see here a couple of lamps, a cup, a jug, and whatnot. And they produced other things too, not just objects, but for instance, in this case, this is a nice one. In this case, there is a room at Gournia with a bench, with a hole. And here is her publication of it. There is a vat, a clay vat, used for pressing grapes. So this was making, and the vase would be down here. So this was making to make wine. So they were producing wine. And we'll come back to that a little bit later. All right, she also found a shrine, a town shrine. Today, this is the palace here. you walk up the stairs, you come to this rectangular building there. And you go up and there was a bench along these two sides. This shrine, as you'll see in a second, the finds from it date to LM3B. So we're down into the 14th century or so. But in fact, if you look at the masonry, here you can't see it, but it's connected to a street which is much earlier. So she believed that the shrine, in fact, dated to the 17th century, say. And then this is what we have here is this is the latest phase. And these are some of the objects that were found there, and I thought it might be interesting. Some of the symbols that were found there, you can see birds, double axe, snakes. I mean, if we were in the classical period now, we would know we would know the gods. This could be Artemis, or could be Athena. The double axe could be Athena. Snakes, the snakes could be Athena, and one of the other shrines produce seashells. All right, seashells, of course, come from the sea, and so does Aphrodite. So I realize, of course, you can't extrapolate directly, but I'm just trying to suggest to you some of the deities that might have been worshipped there. Okay, she also found two cemeteries. One right here, right at the north part of the site, there's the settlement, and one all along this valley. The second one, Sfungaris, consisted of a series of pits and simple pots. The burial was inside the pot, and very often there was maybe one gift. It was quite simple. Whereas the other one, the house tombs that are located right next to the settlement, were quite a lot more elaborate, and some of the finds were quite wealthy. So it looks like we have evidence for what looks to be maybe two social classes. All right, so this is what she produced, amazingly enough, in 3 years of work. Okay, so now let's turn and look at the work that we've been doing. Okay, so the first thing that we did, we started a regional survey of the area that you see outlined there in red. And what we were interested in is to see, we were interested in Gournia at this point, and clearly Gournia sits right at the north mouth of this isthmus, which runs between the Cretan Sea and the Libyan Sea. It was obviously a point, a path of transmission. So this was important. So we got down to here, and I'll tell you why we stopped in a minute. So anyway, the summary, the result was that we produced finds. For each phase, we could see that the landscape was covered with hamlets and with farms. So Gournia is right here, okay? But the landscape itself was populated. Okay, so it wasn't by itself. Okay, our next project, we managed to convince the FRA, the Archaeological Service, to let us go down to the harbor where Boyd, had actually dug one house there. This is the harbor for Gournia, and it rests on a small peninsula which goes way out to sea. Part of it is subsided. So what did we do? Well, we had some underwater people who, look what they found. These were along the edge of this underwater peninsula. They're mooring holes for ships. Or here, there's a staircase that you can see coming down. It's underwater now. So we know that the surface end has subsided 2 meters. We mapped, photographed many of the walls that were right along the coast. You can see there's the coast and this wall. Or here, another one. Again. And these walls run up. To this peninsula, which we just looked at with the main building. And the main building, she excavated, the so-called shore house. And there it is. This is a nice photograph of it. It's partly ruined today, but we can make out its basic form. There are 3 buildings here, which may be administrative buildings. There was a second floor over them, and then 2 large galleries. It's missing this wall here. 2 large galleries, 4 meters wide. There. So this the shore house. This was dug by Boyd, and we would like to go back and we would like to really dig it quite carefully. So a ship would be put in here during the winter. And of course, this is an example of a much larger one. This is the one at Comos. You can see the one at Comos is quite a bit larger because it was a bigger port. Okay. We also found a paved street leading from the harbor that runs all the way back to the settlement. We uncovered just a little bit of it. So this is the end result. There is the shore house. There were 2 sets of walls. 1, 2. And based on architectural parallels, I think that this wall, this fortification wall, is probably proto-palatial. It's earlier. And this one is somewhat later. And there was a building here, an office building of some sort. And there's the street. And here's a nice reconstruction by John McEnroe that shows you what the area would have looked like. There's the settlement, some 400 meters from the coast. There are the 2 walls. There is the shore house. And along here, there is a river, which is very deep. It forms a natural obstacle to anybody who would want to come in. On this side, it's not apparent, but there's a ridge, all right? And there are mountains back there. So the site itself sits in a little valley, protected on 3 sides. But, of course, the coast was open, so there it is. So they protected themselves. So that's it. That's kind of interesting. This is the best preserved system we've got. I mean, there are others. There are remains of one, for instance, at Marian, at Palais Castro, but they're not complete. Here we can see the whole thing. All right, so in 2010, we began an actual excavation on the site itself. We chose to go up north, largely because she had done along the east and the west, and in this area, the earth is very, very deep, so it would be really laborious to get down to the floors and whatnot. So we were mostly, not all, but mostly up in this area here. All right. Probably the single main difference between our project and that of Harriet Boyd is, look at all these specialists that are part of our project. They still are. And we've got people who know a great deal about this data who are telling us things, and you'll see as we go along the amount of detail that we've got now. Harriet Boyd would never been able to do it. She did the whole thing herself. So it's a very different world. All right. She thought the site probably began in the middle of the early Bronze Age, but in fact we found on bedrock in several places we found late Neolithic pottery. So the site itself goes back into the late Neolithic period. And what I'm going to do is I'll take us through the history of the site. Okay? It was certainly well occupied in the early Minoan II period. And here, there are sherds of this so-called Vasiliki ware. There are sherds everywhere on the site. We found them everywhere. So it was clear it was a sizable settlement at that point. This is just to show you what it looked like. This Vasiliki ware was named after the site where it was first found. But for reasons that I'll explain in a minute, we know these were locally made. All right. We know that at the beginning of MM1B, at the beginning of the protopalatial period, we know that the site was really completely reorganized. And what they did is they, at least in the area where we were digging here, they scraped off and dug, they scraped off all the levels that dated to earlier than MM1B, and they dumped them over a wall in this area right here, over this wall. This is a big terrace wall. So this area is the so-called North Trench, where Boyd and her assistant actually dug. There. So they scraped this area, dumped all the pottery and whatnot into this, over this wall in MM1B. We know because here, this is what the complex looks like. It's filled with early Minoan 3, middle Minoan 1A vases, very standardized. And we also got wasters. Wasters, you know, are overfired sherds. We've got potter's rib. So it looks like already in this period, in EM3, this area was producing pottery. That big, well, you look at the side here, it produced 1.5 tons of pottery, 60,000 sherds. So they really worked over this area. All right. This area, this was excavated by Edith Hall, lady in her 20s, and she was helped by Richard Seeger, who some of you may recognize. Edith Hall was in her 20s, and her letters have been published. And in her letter, she mentions the fact that she was very attracted to Richard Seeger. Right? This must have been a very, very heavy-duty work. So we got down to the bedrock of their trench right there. What did we find? A wine bottle and 2 buttons torn from a woman's dress. So maybe they celebrated. That's true. I'm not making it up. All right. So here, the site was reorganized in MM1B, as you see, and there are some of the things that were added. So system of streets, room A, which we'll talk about in a second, and a palace. Up until now, in the literature, with the exception of 1 or 2 articles, most people, you know, Gournia is only supposed to have 1 palace, a later one. But we found evidence for an earlier one, which I'll discuss in a second, and a series of workshops. All of this. Tell me if I'm going too fast. All right. So here, the first structure that was built right in MM1B is what we've called Room A. This is the palace. So it sits up on the upper part of the site, upper northern part of the site, in the so-called Acropolis, right there. It sits on a cobbled court or paving of some sort. There's what it looks like from an aerial view. It's a single room with a door. It's got a bench there. It had a pebble floor and a bench along this side too. Here, look, you can see the bench. This bench is much too small, much too low for somebody to sit on. So it looks like it was maybe for things to leave there. Of course, we have other examples like that. And the shrine itself produced 2 figurines. There's one. The other one is an animal from associated places nearby, and the prow of a boat. And it also produced the areas nearby produced examples of animal bones, cooking, ash, and whatnot. So all put together, I'm convinced that this must have been a shrine. Started in MM1B and continues through MM2. Okay. All right. So we also that was right there. All right. This palace, which you can see in green, was first recognized by our two architects, John McEnroe and Matt Buell, based on the masonry. This is the northern, this huge thing, this is the northern wall of the later palace. But it's built in a very special type of masonry using a special type of stone. And you can see, look, they chose crystalline limestone, which is very hard to get. It's not immediately available. So that it shines, it's almost like marble. All right, and this led these two architects of ours to say that this must be the remains of a first palace, an earlier palace. Well, lucky for us, we found a big deposit dumped right outside that confirms its date. And you can see, I like this deposit very much. I'm publishing it for one reason, but it shows what they were doing in the palace. Look, cups, dozens of cups, all right? Jugs, amphoras, more cups, and cookingware. So this is a place where they met to drink and to eat. Maybe mostly drink. So that's interesting. All right, so the other thing, the system of cobble streets was laid in place. And you can see that here. There's another one, there's another one. Well, we dug on the northern side of these cobble streets, and this is the cobble street, right? There's a little part. That dates to LM1, that street. But look, there's an earlier phase. This street is Proto-Palatial. It goes underneath the later street. And we found it's probably a house here, and a series of basins there. So you can see basin 1, 2, 3. This was an open area in this room. And it produced, as you see over there on the right, good evidence of pottery production. There's a potter's bat. You know what a potter's bat rests on top of a potter's wheel. And the pot sits on the potter's bat, not on the wheel itself. And they can be can be recognized. Peter Warren's got several of these from Myrtos. All right. This is a socket for potter's wheel, and very interesting, a miniature jug with a linear A sign to it. And I'll come back to that at the end. All right. So these basins then, look, there's a drain here. Okay, they're on a slope, so they would have filled with water. And one thinks, given the evidence of the ribs and whatnot, that probably these basins were for water, maybe settling bins for clay. Okay, for production of pots. We found too that in the areas that we've excavated, that some of the walls were clearly done in plaster, and this gives you an idea of some of the colors. And I chose two examples. These are the prettiest ones that we've got. They're both from libation tables. You can see this one was round, this one's rectangular. Okay. So we've been looking now. We'll go up here to this area again. Here, we have two buildings that were built in the beginning of the Proto-Palatial period, about MM1B. This one is known as a pit house because Harry Boyd actually made a pit right in this area. So it was partially excavated, very small portion. And then there's an open court, and then a building with two phases. An early phase, and then this was later rebuilt, so this is somewhat later. All right, so both of these structures have produced evidence for pottery production. The pit house, the one on the north, there you see a nice aerial photograph of it. It was clearly, it had a second floor. It was a residence. There were lots of pots. There is the front door that opens out onto a nice cobble street. Right about here was a sterna, a pit for water, and that produced a potter's rib. So I would like to associate that with the house itself. And interestingly enough, look, there was a vase there with a linear A sign on it. So here we've got whoever was here was literate. All right, the one to the south is a lot more complicated, but I'll just show you this one part here. It was built in MM1B. Look at all it collapsed, and it was clearly producing cups. These are all MM1B cups, and you can see that there was a seal. All right, there's part of it. This is the northern part, and you can see it had a yard. It had a yard with larnikis in it. These are the big clay. They're like wooden structures, rectangular wooden structures that may well have held water. There was a vat here, a pit, a little space, which the John Younger, who's excavating and publishing this, thinks it may well have been where a potter's wheel was. There's a potter's socket, potter's wheel, a potter's rib. A potter's rib, for those of you that aren't sort of obsessive about pottery, is used by the potter. The pot sits on the wheel. The wheel turns, and the man or woman who's doing it needs an object to smooth the side, and that's what those are. And they can be recognized. They're various different shapes. A couple of them are rather standardized, but because they're completely smooth. There's the vat. And this is really interesting. Here's one of the rooms, and you could just make out, look, a pile of white clay which he had saved. Let me go back for just 1 second. You can see too that he also had, look, there were a bench here, very possibly for storing or displaying pottery. All right. This particular workshop also produced evidence of literacy. There are the two. One of them is this particular one is a lid on the right, and a big vase on the left. Next door to it was a metalworking furnace. This is later. This is LM1, MM3, LM1. But it's right next door to it, and you can see here's the metalworking furnace right here. There were rooms here next to it, and here is a mold came from right nearby that shows what they were making. They were making tools. Okay. Now, so we've been looking now, everything that I've showed you so far is from the excavated settlement. When we did the survey, we found, very interesting, that when people look at this, they assume, I think rightly, that what we've got here is the center of a settlement. In other words, she excavated the central portion of it. Okay? And so there are probably more of it around here. But we found houses. Yeah. If everybody's got a, you got it to support. I tested it before coming here, naturally. So this is both. This is forward, and this is the. Where's the laser? That's the laser. All right. Okay. So. All right. So here, we also found houses all along this ridge. Okay? There are houses here on these hills. All right, and there's one big house down here. There's the harbor. So the town itself grew quite a bit during the Proto-Glacial and Neoglacial. It was the biggest town in probably on all of Mirabello Bay. Based on, this is a very vague estimate, but based on the estimate, we would say maybe could have had 800 people. Very vague, because we don't know exactly the size. Okay, so in the late Minoan period, around 1500 or so, there was Gournia. Okay, this was the state, the territory of the state of Gournia. We could establish that, interestingly enough, by when we walked, we found pottery. Okay, we picked up pottery. The pottery within this area was all made at Gournia. It's amazing. We got down here, and suddenly we were in a different zone. The pottery didn't look like anything. It must have come from down in the Arabica, down on the south coast. All right? We know that Syra, for instance, all the pottery from Syra, according to Phil Betancourt, was made at Gournia. Much of the pottery from Mokos was made at Gournia. So this gives us an idea of the size of the state. And let me just point out here, Thrifty Mountain. We'll talk about that in just a second. Okay. So, in the next period, we find that the palace was, a new palace was established. And you can see it's right in this area here. There's what it looks like. It's a nice photo. There's the photo, and there you're looking out into there's the bay. And you can see some of the things. It's got a big set of storerooms here. It's got a court, an open court. There are at least one room here is probably a bathroom. It's got stairs that go up to a second floor that would be the residence. So it's a small building. It's got a nice monumental entranceway here. It's small compared to Knossos or Festos or Malia, but it has all the basic characteristics there. You can see it on the left, and there's a nice reconstruction of what it looked like. So the second palace was established. All right, we dug around this palace, especially down in this area, and lo and behold, we found a pottery deposit that came from this later palace. Look, cut. These are all MM3A. So you can see large groups were gathered there, and look at what they've got. Again, all these cups. There are a few pieces of these belong to a cooking pot. So again, the palace is associated with group communities that are eating and drinking. Our specialists produce a lot of nice evidence as to what people were eating at this time at Gournia. This is mostly based on the work of Evi Margaritis, who's a wonderful paleobotanist. And the main food seems to be sheep goat. Okay? There's some cattle, some pig, ibex. Ibex, of course, they had to hunt for that. Fish and mollusks. So most of these fish are shallow water fish. This is a grouper though, and this is a bream, sea bream. They come from further out. So they were fishing both along the shore and a little bit further out in the sea. All right, what else were they making for food? We come back again to this, there's that vat for making grapes. Today, the area along the coast of Gournia is a huge vineyard. And I asked the local villagers why. Olive trees don't like salt water. You can't plant them next to the sea. Whereas grapes do. because the sea spray comes on and keeps the mosquitoes and the things, bugs off of it. So this is a favorite place for vineyards. All right. Okay, we continued to dig, and we found in this area some kilns. There. This is an updraft kiln. There's the central portion where this is the area in which the air would have come in. And this is a composite. There were 11 different kilns. And based on the number of plaster skins, used 16 different times. This particular kiln or series of kilns dates to the MM3 LM1A period. And it produced bunches of pottery production. We must have 50 of these things. Look, here are your whetstones. You see how smooth they are? The surface is smooth. Again, this is a very standard shape for a whetstone. All right, sockets for the potter's wheel, and finally bats. And you can recognize a bat. This is nice. You can recognize a bat here and here because the center of the bat is worn, because that's where the pot itself was sitting on. All right, so these people, Gournia was producing a range of vases, which today we call Mirabello ware. Why? Because it was clearly it came from this area. And many of the vases were very practical, sort of medium-sized vases like amphors, jugs. Here you've got some storage jars. Now, what I haven't told you, what I didn't get to, was the fact is, how do we know it was made there, aside from the fact that the kilns are there? The fact is that we're very lucky. There's a geological deposit that exists underneath Gournia, and it's called granodiorite. You can see it's gray or greenish. It's like salt and pepper. You can pick it up, and it'll come apart in your hands. So it's a wonderful timber to be included in a pot when you're making pottery. And this Gournia sits on this huge granodiorite deposit. So what we have in effect is a fingerprint for our vases. This Mirabello ware has been traded all through East Crete. It's gone to Knossos. It's found down along the south shore. I remember Gerald showed me some vases that were clearly made from Pyrtos and Meritos Pyrgos that were made in there. So they exported fairly widely. Here, Gournia's right in here. There's Syrah. As I said to you before, Syrah, all the pottery from Syrah was made at Gournia. And very recently, there's a shipwreck that's in the process of being published by Elpiza Hatzidakis. This is from her website. Look, these vases are almost certainly made at Gournia. So it was carrying vases out to the north. We also saw signs of trade. This particular vase, a fairly well-known silver vase that comes from Gournia. We now know that it came from Cappadocia, from the so-called region of the Silver Mountains. So this was imported. This was made in Anatolia. Also, pottery from Cyprus. This was from Gournia, from Harry Boyd's excavation. These are from ours. She, in fact, recognized that as being Cypriot. Now, so we sat down with all this evidence that she's produced and some that we have, and we drew up, you can see, we drew up a plan based on the assemblages of metal and pottery, loom weights, stone vases. We think we can recognize 17 households that are producing bronze, metalwork, 18 that are producing pottery, stone vases 15, textiles 14. So you can see how intensely commercial, industrial the town was. Now, having said that, one of the things that was very interesting was that Boyd records the fact that most of the households in Gournia did not produce big storage vessels. Now, we know from ethnography, from traditional ethnography in Greece, that a traditional Greek family, in order to survive a year, must have at least 5 large pithoi. They didn't have it, which is weird. What this means is, we're not looking at a typical Greek village. What we're looking at is that all these farmhouses and whatnot must have brought their grain or whatever it is, their food produce. They came to Gournia, okay, and traded it for tools, pottery, vases, all kinds of stuff. So this is it's an industrial center for a region. This must have been fairly true, I think, throughout Crete, this kind of regional organization. But I find it very, very interesting. Okay. We also, these come from her excavation. She found a series of, these are scale pans for a scale to weigh. These are weights. And they were all found in this area here, north of the palace, which is open, which suggests that that area may have been a commercial like a market and whatnot. All right, as you all know, around 1520, the Thera erupted, produced a catastrophic destruction. And immediately after that, we find the people of Gournia, they must have been startled, well, worse than startled, they made a huge votive deposit, dedicated, presumably, to the deity or deities that they associated with this. It was found, there's a beetle, the beetle, of course, is a sacred stone, it was found in this area right here. So, and this is what it looked like. This is not it, but it looked just like that. And it was filled with burnt food and pumice. They were putting the pumice in the cups and whatnot because they clearly associated the pumice with the eruption. And this is where, again, where Evie Margarita shines. She's found, for the first time in Crete, large examples of pomegranate. Pomegranate is very rare in the prehistoric Aegean. It was all in this one deposit, which is, it's stunning, it's amazing. And of course, this makes your mind wander a little bit. Of course, pomegranate is associated with Demeter and Persephone, and they're underworld deities. Maybe there's a connection, who knows? Okay, after this huge destruction, the palace added this wing here. Now there's the built there. There's a huge ashlar facade on the west side, specially cut gypsum blocks, and along the south wing. And these rooms produced over 70 fragments of copper, a tin ingot, and a copper ingot. Here are just some of the little pieces of it. So it's clear that this was a storage area for bronze. Now, so this is the area that we're looking at here. Harriet Boyd excavated this area. She came down onto an LM1B destruction, a floor, and she stopped. It makes sense. What she didn't know was that there are two of them. And we dug and found all this material in the earlier one, which is why we produced all this stuff that she didn't see. And of course, probably the most important was we found the linear A tablet. It records a dispersion of objects. A roundel, again, which is a receipt used, and a nodulus. So the palace was literate and producing, at least was certainly was involved in metallurgy work. We also excavated in the central court, 2 or 3 trenches, and this is what we found. Masses of conical cups. People were out in that court drinking something. Yeah. And look, these are all LM1B. So the community gathered in the central court and drank something, came together. What's interesting is it also produced these. Yeah. These seem to be, well, I don't know what they are, but I would guess that they're game counters for some sort of a game. Because we know from there are other sites where the courtyard, there's a kernos, a little stone, which has a circle of little depressions. And we know from Egyptian carols, it was a game that they played, a little board game. So they may have been doing that, if we've identified this correctly, they may have been playing a game as well in the central court. Okay? The last thing that they included, so these, the last is, these are the rooms here that produced all that bronze here. There's room A. Also, they built a court, a porch, which faces out onto the public, onto the central court. There it is. It has a back wall, 3 columns, you can't see the 3rd one there, and so it faces right eastward, right out onto the central court. So, it's right there facing this direction. The highest mountain in East Crete is this one, Mount Thrifty. There's a view. Mount Thrifty is this little nipple. We looked around and we thought to ourselves, now what's the connection here? So of course we got in the car, we went up to the top of this, and what did we find? A peak sanctuary. There, this is the very top, the peak, that has the Greek geographical service has got a big stake there. The pottery, however, wasn't on the very peak, it was over here, right next to the church. Right there. Here's a view that you get. If you look to the west, there's Gournia. If you're standing on the peak, this is where you'd expect the peak sanctuary to be, and look to the north, you can't see anything. But look what happens if you go over. If you move over 10 feet, look what suddenly appears. Almost. There's a visual connection here. And this has, of course, been noted for many peak sanctuaries. So what are they paying? Well, they brought water-worn pebbles. There's a tiny little cup. This is probably a larger cup. 2 figurines. This is part of a torso and an arm. This is a face, which I'll show you in just a minute. Look, pieces of pumice. So they brought them up from the beach and put them there. And clearly, this peak sanctuary is probably a reaction to the huge eruption. There's a drawing. You can see there's her face, her eyes. She has a pigtail. So there was a functioning peak sanctuary, at least in the Neopalatial period after the eruption. All right, like virtually every town in Crete, it was destroyed in LM1B by the incoming Mycenaeans. And the settlement, however, continued to live. We don't know exactly how large it was. It was clearly smaller than the earlier phases. In our excavations, we found virtually no pottery from this phase. The phase is in LM3. We found nothing, but we were in this area. But some of the houses produced it. So it was, the town continued to live, but probably at a reduced size. But what's interesting is, there's the central court, here's the palace. It's this building right here. House HE. House HE was built after the destruction. It's on the south side of the central court, and its plan is Mycenaean. It's what we call a Mycenaean corridor house. Clearly not Minoan at all. And look what they did. They robbed the blocks from the palace in order to build this building. So this building sat on the south side of the central court. On the north side, the palace, the earlier Minoan palace, was in ruins. There. Okay. So this is the central building. It had a monumental facade to it. There was a horns of consecration. There's some of the pottery. And, very interesting, a seal made in Canossian clay, according to John Lambert. So there's a direct connection between Knossos and this building and Gournia in the LM3 period. So, you know, we can augment a little bit of what John Bennett said. It's clear that this part of Crete at this time was part of the Canossian Empire. So we come to the end. I think it's appropriate to come back to Harriet Boyd. Remember what she said up there. And John Younger also, he sent me, I asked him for a report, and I copied, there's his, you notice that we dug 3 residences in our limited excavation. All 3 residences produced signs of literacy. All. The palace and the 2 workshops. Okay? And what's interesting is, okay, you'd expect it maybe for the palace, but for a potter's workshop? In other words, this literacy is associated with people who are artisans. They're, you know, we're not looking at the elite, seemingly. So we know that Gournia was literate, but we don't know exactly how much. But I mean, for us, for our excavation, it was 100% of what we've done. But of course, you can't be sure that that would have been true for Boyd. Boyd only found one piece of linear A, but she wasn't looking for that kind. She didn't know about it. And so my guess is, though, that most of the site, if we could excavate it again, most of the settlement was lived, I would guess. So this brings us to the end. If we accept what she said, what Harriet Boyd said, that is to say that Gournia is a typical example of a Minoan site, we can see this tells us that Minoan society had a large professional middle class that was literate, much more so than contemporary, more developed societies in the Near East and in the Eastern Mediterranean. So this is it tells us something about Minoan society as a whole. So that's really the importance of Gournia because of it's so typical. So.
Thank you very much for this excellent presentation. I think we've seen so many conical cups that our appetite is now ready, but I think it is a tradition that we don't have questions now. There will be plenty of time afterwards, actually, over the reception for people to ask Professor Ventris as many questions as they like. But it is tradition to have a vote of thanks. And I would like to ask my colleague Olga Krystowska to give the vote.
Well, Good evening, everyone, and let me thank everyone first of all. Before I thank Professor Waters, thank everyone for coming to this wonderful lecture, this Ventris Memorial Lecture here at the Institute. It shows how the interest in Aegean prehistory, in Crete, Mycenaean Greece, is flourishing here today, some 60 years after the decipherment by Ventris and his colleagues. As to tonight's lecture, well, thanks. What can I say but a heartfelt thanks. All of us who have had the privilege of studying Aegean prehistory learned, as undergraduates, that Gournia was indeed the most complete example of a Minoan town. Many visitors to the site, and that includes clearly a very large number of those present here today, are intrigued, delighted, maybe even enchanted by the cobbled streets, the little steps up into the houses. 60 houses uncovered by Harriet Boyd. And Aegean prehistorians are professionals amongst us. We know that incredible publication, 1908 I think it is, a double folio volume. It's an extraordinary piece of work, produced 4 years, just 4 years, after the completion of her excavations. When you account for writing time and printing time, this is nothing short of remarkable. And for the time to have the impulse to publish, and to publish so thoroughly. Now, this may not be up to the standards of today's publications, where we have this kind of detail and that kind of detail, and as Vance told us, numerous specialists contributing to a final report, which is going to be, no doubt, volumes long, each of them perfectly capable of providing doorstops, if not more. But on a more serious note, what Vance has demonstrated so well tonight is that there was much, much more that this site could yield. And this is in part because Harriet Boyd did not strip the place down to bedrock. That's what you might think when you visit. You see the cobbled streets, you see the empty rooms, you think, basta, telos, that's it, we know everything. But Vance has shown us that first, Harriet didn't strip the site down. But most of all, we now have, by going back to a site after more than 100 years, there are refined methods of excavation. There are things that, with the best will in the world, Harriet couldn't have realized. Or, something that I certainly didn't know, that she'd stopped at the upper LN1B floor level, but you went down, you found absolutely real gems. So, new excavation techniques, and perhaps even more important, are the new research questions that drive, or should be driving, excavation today. Every excavation is an act of destruction, so you have to have really sound reasons, sound research strategies for proceeding. And those questions, those strategies, will determine the outcome of your excavations, the results. And I think what we've heard tonight is, without a doubt, Vance and his team have made, through their improved techniques, through their new questions, they have made a really major contribution to our understanding of Minoan Crete, to our understanding of Minoan society. So I invite you, friends and colleagues, to thank Vance in the traditional way, and then to join us for a glass of wine served in wine glasses rather than conical cups, but I think the import is still the same. Thank you very much.